I was never the type to snoop. I trusted my husband, David, in the way you trust the ground beneath your feet, assuming it's solid until one day it just gives way. We had been married for 12 years, and though things had cooled off, I thought we were still on the same page. We had a house, a joint savings account, and what I assumed was a shared future. He worked in finance, traveling occasionally for important meetings, while I handled most of the household stuff. It wasn't glamorous, but it was our life. Then came his last-minute business trip to Miami, and something about it didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way he barely looked me in the eye when he told me, or how he suddenly became possessive over his phone, muting notifications and turning its screen down on the table. I didn't want to be paranoid, but doubt has a way of gnawing at you, little by little, until it becomes impossible to ignore. The night before he left, I waited until he was asleep and checked our shared credit card account, something I rarely did since he handled most of the finances. What I saw made my stomach turn. A charge for a luxury hotel in Miami, not booked through his company, but on our personal card. Dinner reservations at a high-end steakhouse, a boutique jewelry store. My hands shook as I scrolled through the transactions, my face burning with the kind of heat that only comes from realizing you've been played for a fool. But instead of breaking down, I felt something else. Calm, focused. If he thought he could humiliate me like this, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The next morning, I kissed him goodbye like nothing was wrong. He smiled, oblivious, told me he'd be crazy busy and might not have time to call. I nodded, feigning understanding. Inside, I was counting the hours until his flight took off. The moment I saw the notification from our airline app confirming his departure, I got to work. First, I logged into our joint bank accounts. We had 3, one for savings, one for bills, and one we barely touched. Over the years, we had built a comfortable cushion, thanks to my careful budgeting and his generous salary. He always liked to joke that I was too responsible with money. Today, that responsibility was about to pay off in ways he'd never imagined. I started small, moving a few thousand at a time into an account under my name only, just enough to avoid triggering fraud alerts. Then I tackled the big one, our savings. $50,000 gone in minutes. I could almost hear his confused voice in my head. That's weird. Must be a bank error. I smiled to myself. By the time he realized what was happening, it would be too late. I even transferred just enough to cover this month's mortgage. Because I wasn't heartless. He could keep the house. I had bigger plans. With the money safely in my account, I turned my attention to the next step, tying up loose ends. I went through our home office, gathering every document with my name on it. The car was in my name. The lease on our vacation condo? Also mine, since his credit wasn't as spotless as he liked to pretend. The utilities, insurance, even the gym membership, every single thing we shared, I had a hand in. He always treated me like I was just the supporting character in his life, the woman who made sure everything ran smoothly while he played the big-shot businessman. He never realized how much power I actually had. Then came the final touch. I logged into his email. His passwords were embarrassingly easy to guess, a mix of our wedding date and his dog's name from childhood. I searched for hotel confirmations, dinner reservations, anything that would confirm what I already knew. And there it was. A long, nauseating email thread with a woman named Melanie. They had been planning this romantic escape for weeks. Her messages were full of, "I can't wait to finally have you to myself, and you deserve to be with someone who appreciates you." I nearly laughed. If only she knew what she was getting. I took screenshots of everything, every reservation, every sickly sweet message, even the itinerary he had so carefully planned. Then, for good measure, I forwarded the entire email thread to his boss. I figured the company might like to know that their dedicated employee was expensing luxury dinners and beachfront suites for his side piece. It wasn't enough to just take his money. I wanted him to feel the consequences, to watch as the life he had built on lies crumbled beneath him. But I wasn't done. I packed a suitcase with just my essentials, leaving behind anything that tied me to our life together. Clothes, photos, even my wedding ring. I left it right there on the nightstand, a final insult to the sham of a marriage we had. Before walking out the door, I left a single note on the kitchen counter. Enjoy Miami. Hope she's worth it. Then, with my bank account full and my dignity intact, I walked away from the house I had once called home, ready to start a life where I was finally in control. I checked into a hotel downtown for the night, just to give myself space to breathe. It was strange the way my emotions swirled. Anger, satisfaction, a hint of sadness, but mostly relief. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even surprised. Looking back, the signs had been there for months, maybe years. The secretive phone calls, the way he'd stopped making real eye contact, how his business trips had started to multiply. But now I didn't have to sit around wondering. I had taken back my power, and the best part? He had no idea. The next afternoon, I got a text from him. "Hey babe, landed safe. Meetings all day, probably won't get to call. Love you." I stared at my screen, shaking my head. The audacity. The man was sitting poolside with his mistress, sipping overpriced cocktails, while assuming I was home, waiting for him like an obedient little wife. I almost felt sorry for how completely out of his depth he was. Almost. I simply replied, "Great. Hope you have an amazing time." And then I blocked his number. By the time he realized what had happened, I was already 3 states away, sipping coffee in a small, sunlit cafe and feeling lighter than I had in years. I had used a portion of our money to secure a short-term rental under my name, far from the life I had left behind. The rest, safely tucked away in an account he couldn't touch. I had already contacted a lawyer, made sure every penny was legally mine, and, just for fun, sent him a formal request for divorce via email. The first frantic call came 2 days later, from an unknown number. I let it ring. Then came the texts. "What the fuck did you do? Where is all our money?" Ah, our money. That made me laugh. Then, "This isn't funny. We need to talk. Call me now." I could almost hear the panic in his voice. I imagined him at the hotel, realizing his credit card was suddenly declined, his bank account wiped clean. Melanie must have been thrilled. I waited an hour before replying, just to let him sweat. Then I sent 3 simple words. "Ask your mistress." The response was instant. "What the hell are you talking about? Don't do this, babe. It's not what you think." Oh, how predictable. I had seen it coming from a mile away. The gaslighting, the desperate attempt to flip the narrative, to make me doubt my own eyes. I let him sit in his self-inflicted misery a little longer before sending him an attachment, the email thread between him and Melanie. I could imagine his face as he opened it, watching the walls close in around him. Not even a minute later, another call. Then another. I let them all go to voicemail, each one more frantic than the last. Finally, a text. "We can fix this. Please, just call me." I laughed out loud, the kind of laughter that bubbles up when you realize you are free. Fix what exactly? The fact that he had lied, cheated, and used our money to fund his little romantic getaway? Or the fact that now I held all the power? Whatever it wasn't my problem anymore. I deleted the message and blocked him. For the next few days, I expected more calls, more texts, maybe even an angry voicemail or 2. But instead, there was silence. It wasn't like him. David had always been the type to bulldoze his way through problems, to talk his way out of anything. That's when I realized he wasn't quiet because he had given up. He was quiet because he was scheming. Sure enough, a week later, I got an email from his lawyer. A pathetic attempt at intimidation. Something about unlawful transfer of marital assets and reconciliation discussions. I rolled my eyes. They really thought I'd be dumb enough to fall for that? I had done my homework. The money I took was from a joint account, meaning I had every legal right to move it. And as for reconciliation, the only thing I was reconciling was my new life without him. I forwarded the email to my lawyer with a simple note. Handle this clown. A few days later, my lawyer called me, practically laughing. Well, he's panicking. Apparently, David had tried to claim I stole from him, but the financial records made it clear. I had moved the money legally, and since we were married at the time, he had no case. He'd also made the classic mistake of trying to play the victim while simultaneously avoiding any real accountability. His lawyer had even suggested mediation. Mediation. As if there was anything left to discuss. Then, the real kicker, David had lost his job. Turns out, forwarding those emails to his boss had worked even better than I had hoped. His company didn't take too kindly to one of their senior executives using corporate trips as personal sexcapades. He had been put on indefinite leave, which was just a polite way of saying don't come back. No job, no savings, and now, no wife. I imagined him sitting in his house, blinds drawn, drowning in regret. And I was doing just fine. A month passed, and with each day, the weight on my chest lifted a little more. I had rented a beautiful apartment in a city I had always wanted to live in but never could because David hated change. I reconnected with old friends, found a job I actually enjoyed, and for the first time in years, I felt like me again. Not someone's wife, not someone's afterthought. Just me. Then, one evening, as I sipped a glass of wine on my balcony, a new email popped up. The subject line? Please, let's talk. I nearly deleted it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was from David, of course. The tone was different this time. Less anger, more desperation. He wrote about how he had lost everything, how Melanie had ditched him the second his credit card stopped working. How he missed me, how he realized now that I was the best thing that ever happened to him. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I let the email sit there, unread after that first skim, like a piece of trash I hadn't gotten around to throwing out yet. I didn't reply. What was there to say? Oh, I'm so sorry your mistress turned out to be a gold-digging opportunist. That must be so hard for you. Please. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry for getting caught, for losing the cushy life I had built for him. A week later, another email. This one even more pathetic. I don't have anywhere to go. Can we just talk? Ah, there it was. He wasn't just lonely. He was desperate. I imagined him sleeping in that big empty house eating microwaved ramen, wondering how he went from fancy dinners in Miami to begging the wife he cheated on for a second chance. And still, I didn't reply. I was done. Done being his safety net, his backup plan, his second choice. He made his bed. Now, he could lie in it. Alone. Days turned into weeks, and eventually, the emails stopped. No more pathetic pleas, no more guilt-tripping. I knew why. He had finally accepted that I wasn't coming back. Or maybe he had found another poor woman to manipulate. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. Then one afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. Normally, I don't answer those, but something in me just knew. I picked up, and there it was. His voice. Small, defeated. Hey, I don't even know what to say. For a moment, I let the silence stretch between us. Then, in the calmest voice I had ever used with him, I said, "Then don't say anything." And I hung up. That was the last time I ever heard from David.